You're listening to the Mile High Church podcast. Candlelight, candlelight, candlelight. It's on its way. December 23rd and December 24th, 1, 4, and 7 p.m. Dr. Roger is coming. So much incredible music, including Laura Berman, Gary Lynn Floyd, Cheryl Renee, Cody Qualls, our choir. Some of us ministers will be hanging around. You light a candle. It's a beautiful service. Please join us for this sacred night.
Today, our focus is putting on an armor of joy. And generally, I know that's not what you generally think of when you think of joy, nor is it what I want to consider when we think of armor, because this is the armor that is, as it's usually seen, as something heavy, as something rigid, as something metallic, and something we use to defend ourselves. But what if the truest nature, what if the truest armor is something entirely different? What if it is spiritual in nature? What if the lighter, the more subtle something is, the more powerful it becomes? What if joy also, when we consider joy, is one of the strongest protective mechanisms that we have? And I'm not talking about the joy that we pluck off of some shelf. It's not something that we can get outside. It's the joy that bubbles up from the very nature of who we are. And so this armor of joy this morning is a kind of shield that comes from trusting in God. It's a kind of shield that is built as we build our faith through our spiritual practice, and from looking for and expecting the positive in our life, from building a practice of gratitude. From this joyful heart, it allows us to go out in the world with more openness, with more vulnerability, with a deeper sense of connection. And it allows us to open up more rather than to close down, protect, guard against, push off, push away. When we have worked with our minds, through the discipline of our spiritual practice, when we have learned to face our fears, to be with them, when we've prayed, contemplated, and meditated upon spiritual principle, these become our superpowers on a road to a greater joy, a deeper sense of well-being. And it's not about avoiding, it's about being with. You know, we've been conditioned to believe that heaviness and walls and barriers and guards are the things that make us safe. That more control, that more vigilance, more rigidity, the more we have all of those things gathered around us, then the more protection we wield in life. But Spirit teaches us something different. The lighter the energy, the more power it holds. The more joyful the heart, the stronger the shield of protection. So I invite you to consider this morning how you've been choosing and aligning your focus in life. Have you been focused on cultivating and being with the emergence of joy through your spiritual practice, or has the frequency of fear been dominating and causing you to shut down more, to keep that protection by keeping out rather than opening to allow in? When we focus on what is broken, lacking, frightening, or wrong, we feed fear. And when we focus on what is true, beautiful, noble, pure, and uplifting, we feed joy. Thich Nhat Hanh expresses it perfectly. He says that at any moment you have a choice that either leads you closer to your spirit or further away. During my undergraduate years at the University of Illinois, I belonged to a women's group. And at the beginning of every one of our groups, we had this anchoring mantra, which was a bit of scripture that came from St. Paul from Philippians 4:8. And we would recite it together from the King James Bible. It went like this: "Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, Whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good rapport, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. I can still hear the ring of the recitation of 100 women reciting that together at the beginning of every meeting. And all I have to do is think of that verse, and it supports me in refocusing the vibration of my own thought. Like, what am I thinking upon? Recently I came across the New Testament. No, that's not a typo. It is the New Testament. The New Testament is a translation, and I believe this same verse is concise, but it has that resonance that comes forth. It says, in conclusion, friends, whenever you find things that are true or honorable, righteous or pure, lovable or praiseworthy, or if virtue and honor have any meaning, let them fill your thoughts. Let them fill your thoughts. It speaks to me of where we put our focus, that very choice, that reminder that we always have the ability to discipline our own minds to put our focus in the place that we decide to place it. I came across this armor of joy from yet another women's circle this year. We gather once a month, and this particular year we have been saturating and in the study of the Bodhisattva Tara, which comes to us from the faith tradition of both Vajrayana and Mahayana Buddhism. And in this circle, each one of us was belovedly assigned an emanation of Tara to focus on for the year, to meditate with, to learn from, to really contemplate. And I was assigned Tara Satata Patra. She's the 19th emanation of Tara. And though she is known as the invincible queen of the white parasol. You'll see her on a tanka here that I've placed behind me. This hangs, I immediately went out and found this tanka to hang on my meditation room wall so that I could sit in devotion beneath her for the entirety of the year and allow her to inform my path, to learn from what it was that she stands for, and allow that energy to move into my life. Her name says it all. Sita means purity, and Atapatra means parasol. Her parasol, the white parasol that you also can see up here on the altar, is not made of steel. It's made of radiance. It shields not through force, but through light. Her armor is joy. Joy that comes from the inside out, this inherent state of being that is inherently spacious, that is compassionate, that carries the frequency and the vibration of spirit, which is joy. It steadies us, it protects us by aligning our awareness with God. So what we can learn from this emanation of Tara is that we can choose to tame, to discipline our mind through our spiritual practice and steady our hearts in that awareness of spirit, in that awareness of God, the essence of God within us. In Eastern spiritual traditions, such as Buddhism and Hinduism, we often see deities depicted with multiple weapons of different tools. You'll see it up here on the screen. All those tools surrounding the deity up there. But these weapons are not about violence. Rather, they symbolize the spiritual capacities designed to protect our well-being, to protect our joy, designed to protect the very teachings that bring us into an awareness of the divine within. The conch shell is a call to awakening. The spear or the knife is for piercing delusion. The sword is for cutting through attachments. And the chains are for neutralizing harmful forces. And these implements teach that our awakened mind is both skillful, powerful, and it is equipped, inherently equipped, for meeting life's challenges. And while there isn't a literal weapon that symbolizes joy, there are symbols that express joyful courage. Satatapatra's parasol calls us to a fearless strength that arises from a joyful heart, that arises through our spiritual practice and awareness. So we're going to look at some ways this morning that we can develop this protective nature of joy within our life. You know, do you ever have every year some things that guide your year? You maybe, Reverend Josh leads us through that wonderful intention workshop on New Year's Day, and we get in touch with a governing, an anchor point for our year, and we select a word, or maybe you select a God quality, or maybe there are stories and parables. And do you ever notice that once you have set that anchor point for your year, that now around every corner you see abundance, every corner you see that symbol of joy, you see that symbol of deep reverence, devotion, whatever it is, the word that you chose, you begin to see it around every corner. Well, that was true for me because this year a parable that actually is related to joy, related to Satatapatra, came forward in my life really early on. And it's a parable that has repaired for me relationships, that has guided me in my own thinking. It has been something that I come back to, this anchoring parable that I come back to again and again in order to stay on that path this year of spiritual growth, of spiritual development, of spiritual deepening, of spiritual connection. And that parable, you may have heard it as well. It's a very well-known parable, but it comes to us from the Native American tradition, specifically the Cherokee Nation. And it tells the story of the two wolves. And it's where this young boy comes home to his grandfather one night, and he has been wronged by another boy. There has been injustice, and he is so filled with anger, and he just can't get it out of his mind. And he comes to his grandfather, and he says, "I am so upset. Please help me." And the grandfather says, "Oh, I can really relate to that. Let me tell you a story. I also have felt great hatred for those who have taken so much and have shown no remorse, have shown no sorrow. And I have found that hatred has brought me down over time. I have felt like it has been like drinking poison and hoping that outside of me, the enemy would hurt more. Oh," he says, "I have struggled with this so greatly in my life." And he goes on to share, he says, "It's like inside of me there are these two wolves. One wolf is the wolf of the light, is the wolf of love, of hope, of kindness, of peace, of joy, of generosity, of truth, of compassion and faith. But then there's this other wolf. And this other wolf is a wolf of the shadows and the challenges, the strong emotions, the wolf of anger, the wolf of envy and sorrow and greed and arrogance and guilt and fear. The littlest thing will set this wolf off into a temper. He's trying to fight people all the time, this other wolf. He says, "Oh, it's been so hard for me to live with these two wolves who are always trying to dominate my spirit within me." And the grandson looks up at him with a face full of concern and a face full of wonder, and he says, "Well, grandfather, what happens with these wolves? Which wolf wins?" And the grandfather smiles and says, the wolf that I feed. This story has been right at the helm of my life ship this entire year. Again and again, I have been called to remember that we all have these wolves within us. We all have these wolves within us. How difficult it is when the shadow wolf is lashing out and striking against us. And I've found, though, that this parable absolutely has the complete capacity to bring about healing in my own experience, in my relationship to myself. Which wolf am I feeding? In my relationship with others, which wolf am I feeding? As I look out on the world around me, which wolf am I feeding out there? Which one? It has the capacity that when we decide to focus upon the positive, the wolf of the light, to feed that wolf with our focus, with our attention, to raise and to praise, to look of that within other people and to speak it out loud, to say it, to share it, that wolf begins to step to the forefront of our mind. You know, this symbol of the white parasol carries so much meaning. When we hold it up here, we are under this dome of wisdom and this skirt of compassion. And this central axis is the axis mundi, the center of the universe, reminding that as we gather under wisdom and as we gather and cultivate compassion, we move into the awareness of the center of our being. Satapatra uses this parasol to dispel strife, to dispel conflict, nightmares, to remind us that whoever stands beneath this is under a shield of the protection of joy. And she says, these things come about through our awareness, not through aggression, but through illumination. Because to heal strife with our fast-fueled brains, we have to begin to discipline our minds. Let's not set it on fire. There we are. Chandra Easton writes in her book, Embodying Tara, realizing the true nature of our mind, which I also would clarify is the very nature, which its very nature is calm and neutral. She says to recognize the true nature of our mind is like pouring cold water into boiling water. It instantly stops it from scalding us. So when the boiling water of suffering is calmed down, that innate joy within us rises naturally, like a clear lake settling after a storm. It is the mountain strength of inner refuge. That is our parasol of light. And that brings us to our second talking point this morning, which is steadying the heart, joy in the face of negativity. Across spiritual traditions, teachers and practices have long centered and asked one essential question: how do we meet the negativity of the world around, the suffering of the world around us, without becoming weakened and overwhelmed and overtaken by it? How do we steady our hearts when life is so unsteady around us? And what does that all have to do with the thoughts that we think? You know, I've been exploring this question as I have been immersed in a new release book called Guided, that's out by Laura Lynn Jackson. And it's called Guided: The Secret Path to an Illuminated Life. You know, Laura Lynn Jackson is a specialist. She supports people with grief, with loss, with tragedy, in connecting with their loved ones, to feel the presence of their loved ones around them, and to connect with the larger field of spiritual guidance. And in her book, she has a chapter entitled Honoring the Mind, in which she writes, "We must recognize that our thoughts are the energy that powers our lives and defines our path through existence. In honoring our mind, we strive to tend our thoughts more carefully and vibrantly." And she goes to talk more about her work. She has learned again and again how thoughts contain a certain powerful energy that can not only significantly change our lives, but can also move us into a greater connection with the universe and a realization that our very thoughts, our own personal thoughts, have impact throughout the universe, throughout the whole universe. She says when we're engaged with the frequency of fear, self-criticizing, complaining, judging those around us, we're sorely underestimating the power and the creative potential of our thoughts. You know, when I worked in the schools as a school psychologist, we did a little experiment. Maybe some of you have done this experiment too, where I cooked rice and I got 2 little glass bottles with corks on the top, and I put some of the cooked rice in both of the little bottles, and I securely corked the top, and I brought it to school. And every time I met with the students, I invited them to speak kind thoughts to this jar, to speak loving thoughts, compassionate thoughts, thoughts of understanding, gentle thoughts. And to this jar, I invited them to get it all out: the anger, the upset, the worries, the hatred, the extreme, challenging energy that was within them. I invited them to give it to this jar of rice. And while both of the jars fermented over time, it was clear that one jar, the one jar with the kind thoughts, would have fermentation that looked a little pink, a little yellow, and the other jar, it turned black. It turned black. I took it into a staff meeting. I wasn't the most popular that day, you know, and I said, "Hey, look what our thoughts are doing to us." Yeah. Anywho, but the power and the impact of our thoughts on our own self. Our words have impact, not just on ourselves, but on the entire world around us, the atmosphere around us. Jackson, in her book, shares a similar lesson that comes through the remarkable story that Lynn McTaggart shared in her book, The Intention Experiment, in which in 1966, there was Cleve Baxter, and he was a chief polygrapher for the CIA, and one night he got a little bored, you know, nothing to do, and this, you know, sitting around, and he's like, wanted to entertain himself, so he went and got a plant and set it down next to himself and hooked it to the polygraph machine because he wanted to see the impact of when he watered the plant, how the plant would respond. And when he didn't initially get a lot of reaction, he thought to himself, well, gosh, maybe like when I do polygraph for humans, I should elicit an emotional response. And he had the thought that he was going to go get a match and burn a leaf of the plant. And the very second he had that thought, the polygraph went seismic in its response. You can see it up there. Look, the thought of burning a match under the plant. See the plant's going along and then whoosh, seismic impact. That's the power of negative thoughts that are quantumly communicated throughout our world. Think about how we're talking to ourselves, how we're talking to each other, how we're talking about the planet, how we're talking about the world around us. Seismic impact. The power of our thoughts. The point of the story isn't the mechanism, it is the mystery. Consciousness responds, intention ripples out. Thoughts, quite literally, are matter. They matter. Thoughts are things. Focus shapes our reality. And this brings us back to joy. Joy is not naive positivity. It is the result of intentional, positive thinking, and inner luminosity. It is the result of our aligning with the frequency of spirit, which brings us to the superpower of gratitude, joy as soul empowerment. Gratitude is a joy generator. A joy generator. So you all can go home today and generate some joy simply by getting into a state of gratitude. You know, Dr. Wayne Dyer once said, each morning when you open your eyes, think, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then go about the day and harvest the gifts. I have a very dear friend and mentor, Lynn O'Leary, and he likes to remind me that you can even extend it a little bit more. Before you even get out of bed, start to say your gratefuls. I am so grateful for this breath. I am so grateful for this day. I'm so grateful for the love that moves through my life. I am so grateful for this home. I am so grateful for my health. And you better believe I do not wake up in the morning anxious always to do my gratitude. I have to, sometimes it is the very nature of this practice that brings me back to center. You know, Thomas Merton once wrote that gratitude awakens us to wonder, to new wonder. That's exactly it. And I find myself every day grateful for the ways joy reveals itself through the people around me. Recently in the office, little Nancy, sweet Nancy June, Reverend Josh's daughter, she was learning to whistle. And she was practicing, and she was and sharing that with all of us, you know, and we were working on whistling with her. It was so amazing to watch her working that whistle. She's so good at it too. And it took me right back to the moment when I learned to whistle. Do you remember that time in your life? Either you learned a new song, perhaps as a child, or you learned a whistle, and that was that moment, that revelation. It was my grandfather that had such patience with me. And he would sit with me, and he'd say, you have to, and I would, and he'd be like, no. And weeks of that. And then one day, the song emerged. The song emerged, and I felt it, and it never left me. Something shifted and joy emerged. That's always been one of my pocket tools of keeping the joyful song in my heart, is returning to the whistle. And I wonder what that might be for each of you. What is that joyful song you return to that brings you back, that strengthens you, and brings you back into your center to feel and to know that connection with that inner divine light within you? Joy is our parasol of light, softening the harshness of fear. And we're now going to close with the Satata Patra's melody, which Laura is going to play for us on the piano, and I am going to speak Satata Patra's mantra into the room before we move to prayer. Om Sarva Tathagata Ushnika Satata Patre Fat Mama Nisoha. Om Sarva Tathagata Ushnika Satata Patre Fat Mama Nisoha. Om Sarva Tathagata Ushnika Sitapatre Fat, Mama, Ni, Soha. And with that, we move into prayer, inviting any practitioners to join me, to stand with me as we open our hearts to feel and to know, to recognize the infinite presence of God, of Spirit, that oneness in everything we see. Opening our hearts to realize that essence, that presence of Spirit in the fabric of our own lives. Knowing that it is in that recognition that we deepen in to allow joy to emerge. For it comes from that tending to that inner world within. And so what I know is that each one of us carries this parasol of joyful protection. That it comes as we focus on what is positive, as we bring forth the superpower of gratitude. Oh, we allow that thanksgiving to bring about a deep sense of lightheartedness, of joyfulness, of grace. And so I am so grateful to feel and to know the ways in which Spirit moves through each one of our lives. To feel and know that each one of us is always, always anchored in the presence of God. And so we open our hearts this morning to trust, to deepen our faith, to focus on tending that light, positive wolf of loving kindness, of compassion, of gentleness, of harmony, of joy. It's with that gratitude we release this prayer this morning, allowing the Father God, the Mother God within to do the work. We set it free. We allow it to be. And so it is.
Thanks for listening to the Mile High Church podcast. This podcast is made possible by the generous contributions from listeners like you. To make a donation, please visit milehighchurch.org.